Gary, I think, has trained more APL programmers than anybody else I know. And he has distilled his knowledge of training into a tutorial, an online tutorial, which is now available, ported to Dyalog APL and available, well, we haven't quite released it yet. It'll be out there in a short while. But he's here to tell you about that story now, I believe. Gary?
Can you hear me? I didn't want anybody bitching about the small font, so if you've got a problem with the big font, let me know that. Despite the incredible power of APL, occasionally you can't do it all yourself and you need to hire somebody else. When that happens, you have two choices. You can go out and find some experienced APLer, and that gets harder and harder all the time. Or you can find somebody who you think will be able to be trained as an APLer, and you build them, you create them, you train them. So when you're faced with this situation, and we were about a year ago, that you need an APLer, you've got your two choices, and there's advantages and disadvantages to each. If you're going to hire an experienced APLer, we'll talk just about the positives here. You're going to have somebody that's productive immediately. Immediately means, a couple of weeks. They've got to learn the ropes about your particular application and whatever, but then they're in business. You don't need to be a trainer. You don't need to pay for a trainer. You've got somebody who can get up and go if you hire the right person. It's not going to cost you any money to train them. And there's always the nice side effect that maybe they can teach you some new tricks. On the other side, you can build your own. There are advantages there too. You've got a vast pool of candidates, which is perhaps a con as well as a pro. Novice is probably going to be cheaper than a pro. Should be. You got no bad habits to break. And you can customize them so that what you end up with is a little Gary clone. A clone of whatever it is that you want. We decided to go with this latter approach. Rather than look, we've done the other, hiring experienced APLers this time. I decided I wanted to try training one. So the first step is to come up with the right ad to find this person, because there's such a vast pool of candidates out there. And in this job market, if you put an ad in the paper that says, looking for a programmer will train, 5,000 ads are going to come out. If you get a headhunter to help you, they're not going to know the necessary APL requirements. So it's really on you. You've got to qualify through an ad to try to get the right people to come across that you can interview them in some time less than 100 years. This was the ad that we put together. Give you a chance to look at it, see if you think you qualify. Computer programmer, business person wanted, will train as needed. All you have to do is call this phone number. Now, when we passed this along to the local newspaper, they came back and said, you forgot the phone number. We cannot run this without a phone number. And I said, if I put the phone number in there, there's no point in running it. And so we compromised, and finally he said, well, all right, if you give me an email address, we need 2 forms. Give me an email address and we'll consider that other thing a phone number. And they took it. Now, these questions don't assume any knowledge of APL, but my experience over the years is that the kind of people who can answer these kinds of questions are the kind of people that are sitting in this room. They're all over the lot. I mean, the last one, the second derivative of 3x squared. You don't need to know any calculus to do APL, but my experience in dealing with APLers is they're good at APL because they're good abstract thinkers. They're good abstract thinkers, so they probably took calculus, and for some damn reason, they can't forget what the second derivative of 3x squared is. And if they don't remember what it is, they know where to go to find it if they really want this job bad enough. So there's some problems in here that have to do with programming. That was to eliminate the plumbers and the bricklayers. And we would be getting resumes from plumbers and bricklayers. And if you're saying you're going to train somebody to be a programmer, there's some sort of math questions in there to get rid of the COBOLers. You don't want them. And then there's some logical questions in there so that you get rid of the people who really are never going to quite be able to get it. You know, not everybody can learn APL. You believe that, right? This second to last question, are any of the apples in an empty barrel green? That question, you know, I was half hoping that I had a 1 in my phone number so I could ask the question, are all of the apples in an empty barrel green? But I'm glad there was no 1, because I don't think I would have gotten any responses if I did that. That question managed to get through because people would say, well, are there any apples in an empty barrel? Well, no. The fact that it was green didn't seem relevant. There aren't any, no. So it really was just a question of, could you figure out how to convert the word no into a digit? And that worked fine. There were 9 questions, but there's 10 numbers in a phone number, 10 digits in a phone number. So one of those in there has got a two-digit answer. So this was the ad, and we ran this thing. And the calls started coming, and the very first call was left on as a phone message, and it was, I've cracked the code. I've cracked the code, Zark. I've got it. I've called you. I've cracked the code. You know, give him an A for enthusiasm. So I called him up, and I said, that's very good. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you answered these questions? In particular, I'm curious about the sum of the digits of the sum of the digits of the reciprocal of the probability, all those ofs, you know, sort of an APL kind of thing, right to left, right? Of the probability of club ace and club king. And I'm expecting him to say, well, let's see, you know, you got 52 cards, blah, blah. He says, well, that one I did in Excel. How did you do it in Excel? I said, well, I don't have my notes right here with me right now. Okay, fine. Let's go on to another one. The log base C of E over M, where M is the mass. That one I did in Excel too. How did you do that? Well, so we went through these questions like this, and it was going about like that. And finally he said, you know, I don't think this is going to work out. I said, I don't think this is going to work out either. It was the first thing we agreed on. The first thing that he said that I believed. So before he hung up, I said, how did you get the phone number? He said, well, you know, your email address was Gary Bergquist. I Googled that. That led me to Zark, and I Googled that. And there was your phone number. So, well, you know, I still didn't want to hire him. So I contacted the newspaper, changed the email address so that it was nothing revealing. And I ended up probably with 30 phone calls. So the next step, back to this, is you need to qualify with a phone call, brief phone call. So you've got 30 people that call. They call, I'd say, thank you very much. Let me have your name, phone number, I'll call you back. So I'd call them back, spend about 5 minutes on the phone with them, and I would go through, can you tell me how you got the answers to these questions? Other than that individual, the rest were not trying to pull the wool over my eyes. And I'd go through it, and right away you could tell. Some of them, you know, they really didn't know how to do some of them. Some were very creative. Some spoke with other people to get the answer. Some, you know, you can judge. You can begin to eliminate somewhat the people that are qualified and not qualified. So I would ask them, tell me about how you actually solve those problems. When are you available to start? Have you done any programming? Turns out, I was asking this, I don't know why, but I really should have placed a little more emphasis on that one. I'll get back to that in a second. Send me your resume and I'll call you back. Total time, maybe 5 minutes. Could eliminate a few. Maybe now I'm down to about 20. Now, can you send me your resume? That eliminated a few people right off. I don't exactly know why, but I didn't get everybody's resume back. And once you got back the resumes, you can look them over and you can qualify a little bit further. Finally, your list is pared down somewhat. I was probably down to about 20. The phone interview. This is going to take 30 to 45 minutes. You got to put in some time in order to find the right person. So I contacted each of these people. I've got their resume in front of me, and I've got a pad of paper, and I've got some questions. The point of the phone interview, like any interview where you're thinking about hiring somebody, is just to get them talking. You get them talking, you find out a little bit about them, and by the end of the interview, you've got some idea whether or not they're reasonable or not. You've got their resume. You already know whether they're viable. If they're not, you're not calling them back. So I had some questions. You can have any questions you think are reasonable. This is open-ended. Open-ended questions. Tell me about the high points of your career. Tell me about the low points. One person said the high point was getting hired at this last job I had. And the low point was getting hired at this last job I had. He hated that job, you know. It was the best. He left a job he was perfectly happy with to go to another firm where he was going to make more money, and he hated it. So his high and low points were at the same moment. I thought that was interesting. Circumstances of your most recent job termination. That's always interesting to get their view on why they were canned. See how they see it. It tells you a little something about the individual. Why do you like programming? What's your view of the perfect program? Let them talk abstractly. See how nerdy they are. You know, for you. Maybe you like them nerdy, maybe you don't. Whatever works for you. How do you... This question was, if you were given a task that you had to solve in a day, and you knew it was going to take 4 days, what would you do? And it was interesting to see how they would answer that question. Again, just open-ended questions, they get to chatting. But this interview is not all about you finding out about them. At the end of it, you may say, that guy is perfect. You say, I'd like to hire you. And he says, well, tough. I don't like you. So part of this interview has got to be selling yourself, selling the job, selling what it is they're going to be doing. So then a little bit on, well, let me tell you a little bit about the job. This is the way it's going to look. This is what a day in your life is going to look like. Basically, you're making your pitch. And always I would start out with APL. Let me tell you about APL. There's no other language like APL. It affects your brain. It affects your mind. It makes you a spiritual person. I mean, I can go on, you know. And they're listening, and I'm good at it. I'm good at trying to convince somebody how wonderful APL is and all that kind of stuff. So they listen to that, and they go, ooh, I like that. I want APL. You describe the business. This is what we do. This is how we use APL. And this is what your job would look like if you were to get hired. You've got to make sure you want to do this sort of thing, okay? This is how you're going to be operating. This is how you're going to be paid. This is what your life is going to look like. And then I send them the test. This particular test, I got a year ago at the conference in Copenhagen from Joachim. He was talking about what he did to qualify and to qualify applicants for jobs that he was offering. This particular test is a tutorial that's like a 7-page document. It describes a little bit about APL. Assumes you have no knowledge of APL. It's a little bit about the syntax, the right to left stuff. And then it presents a simple problem, and then one a little more difficult, and then one that's just a killer. I mean, that last one requires that you understand not equal scan, that you can derive it on your own. You know, it's a crazy, ridiculous problem. But it's good to see how they're going to react to this sort of a thing. I liked his thing. So I would send this to him as a PDF file. They'd work. I'd say, now, call me back anytime you have any questions whatsoever. Give me a call. I just want to familiarize you with APL. You're going to be using APL. This will give you a little familiarity with it, and we'll see how you take to it. That's going to be important. And off they would go. Now, after the interview, after I would talk to each of these individuals, and you'd be writing down everything. I'd write down everything that they would say, because there's this guy with a weird voice that I don't like. There's this guy that irritates me. There's this person that I do like. And after you talk to 15 people, it all blurs. You can't remember. Was this a guy I hated? I liked it. I don't remember, you know, and I just wasted it. You know, I ran the ad in the paper. I've spent all this time, and I don't remember anything. So very important, take very careful notes about each of these individuals, and everything you're thinking as you're thinking. And at the very end of it, always when I interview somebody, I put down my 5 E's. 0 to 10 for each of these things. Education. How well educated are you? You have a bachelor's. Perhaps that's all that's required. Experience. Do you have experience in the workplace? Is it an important thing? 0 to 10. Your enthusiasm. That can be important. Maybe it's not. Depends on the job you're offering. Their ability to elucidate, to express. If they're going to be in contact with clients, it could be very important that they can express themselves well. And their ethics. Now, I don't ask them, do you torture little animals? You can speak with somebody for 20 minutes, and you can put a score on that. And I found in my experience, if I write down scores on these categories and file it away and hire somebody and pull this thing out 10 years later and look at it, I'll go, my God, why did I hire that guy? I mean, it said it right there, that his elucidation was low. The guy is, you know, whenever he talks with it, he can't teach a class because he can't put together a complete sentence or something. You trust your instincts. Anyhow, that's what I do. So now I've got a score that's probably between 45 and 50. Usually they're pretty high already. They've been fairly well qualified. And now I start to get back feedback from these. Now we're down to about 10 people. I was in this particular. instance, who are taking this test. They're seeing it as a little tutorial, a little something to familiarize themselves. And they're contacting me, and it turns out there's 3 categories of people. There's those who I'll never hear from again. They look at this 7-page tutorial, they read through it, and they say, I don't understand any of this. Despite the fact they were able to answer all those questions at the beginning, you know. They just, it's not for them. Or maybe they really had a lot of help from their spouse, from their brother or something to answer those other questions. So some of them just drop out. Some of them, they struggle, but they're really determined. Some of them just have no problem. They just kind of blow through it. Some of them really have no problem, blow through it, but they're irritating as hell, you know, and I don't want to work with that guy, you know. So you learn things as you deal with these people, and now the most difficult thing is to narrow the field. So now you've got it down to something manageable. Let's say 4 or 5 individuals who you really might hire. So at this point, you're going to have to put in a little more time, have a face-to-face interview. So in my case, I scheduled an interview, lunch. Let's do lunch with 4 of them. There was the Marine, there was the engineer, there was the minister, and there was the convenience store manager. And they were very interesting interviews. And after this interview with these people, you're picturing them. And when I would go on these interviews, all I would do is say, look, I'll tell you what. We're going to have lunch here. Why don't I tell you my life story? I'm going to tell you about how I got to be here, and why don't you tell me about how you got to be here? Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first? And they would say, and then I'd go first, or they would, and we'd chat. And at the end of it, I'd say, all right, well, you know, I'll let you know. And then I'd have to think about who I really thought could fit in that position. We've been through a lot of this now, so it comes down to where you've got to finally pick the best 1 or 2. I don't know why, but I hired the engineer. And then on a lark, I hired the convenience store manager. And I'm glad I did. Now, the reason that you might pick 2, even though you only have a position for 1, is 1, it might not work out. 2, and you don't want to go through that again. 2, you know, you're going to need someone again pretty soon anyhow. I mean, if you hire someone that's good, probably you're going to be generating more business and need someone else. Think about the possibility of hiring 2. I hired 2. 1 did not work out. The engineer did not work out. The engineer did not work out because he had never been a programmer. I didn't think it was that important. The guy was so sharp. He was sharp. But he had never been a programmer. I didn't think it was that important. I thought, you know, as an APLer, I thought that knowing about computers was a small part of it, but it turns out it's not. The convenience store manager was unbelievable. She was enthusiastic. She had been going to community college part-time and teaching herself programming, and she had a bachelor's degree in music. She was just crazy, but good. So the next step is to plug her into the tutor. So let me tell you about what the tutor is, okay? I've taught a zillion APL classes. For a while, it's all I was doing is teaching APL classes, and I'd get up, I'd get halfway through a sentence and say, wait a minute, did I say this already? Or was that yesterday? I can't remember. Intro classes, advanced classes, intermediate classes, 2-day classes, 4-day classes, classes about file design, classes about techniques. And I got tired of doing it, and one of the things is I got frustrated too, because I know a lot about APL, and I know that I was not teaching them APL. The most complete APL class I ever taught was the first one I ever taught. First one, it was a 4-day class, and I taught everything. I taught everything. I taught everything that was in the book. And of course, they didn't learn anything. But at the end of the class, they all thought it was a wonderful class. And it was the first time I realized that when you teach APL, people aren't rating you, they're rating the language. They thought it was a great class. It was a shit class, a lousy class. And it was lousy because I covered everything on such a surface level they didn't actually learn anything. And from that point on, I kept paring things back and paring it back, and they learned more and more, but really deeper, but not quite as much. And it was frustrating for me because a 4-day, 5-day, 6-day, 10-day class wasn't going to be enough to really teach them APL. So I decided to build a computer-based training course. And one of the reasons that led me to this decision is I've got a good friend who also knew APL, had done APL for about 6 years. And he was now a computer-based training expert. It's what he did. He put together computer-based training software. So I talked him into working with me to do this. Tell me how I have to do it. I know the APL. You know how to take something and make it fun and friendly and all of that kind of stuff. So we worked together. It took longer than we thought it would, and we built a computer-based training course. This was quite a few years ago. It was in APL Plus PC, then migrated to APL Plus DOS, then to APL Plus Win. The course is constructed of a number of units. Consider them sort of chapters. These are the first 9. And like a book, you can kind of work through it from the beginning to the end. But like any computer-based training, you have to allow for the fact that some people want to work from the end to the beginning, or from the middle out. You have to allow them to do whatever it is they want to do, however they want to do it. But for any given unit, the general method was that it would consist of 3 parts. You'd go into number manipulation functions, and you'd go through the tutorial section. The tutorial section would explain to you how these things work, what they're all about. We'd have these little characters come up to try to make it light. The language would be light. We'd put in humor wherever we could. And they would explain the material. And at the end of the tutorial session, we'd go into something that required a little more interaction. This is, after all, computer-based training, called the reading problems. So it might say 2, 3, plus 4, 5, 6. Press the enter when you're ready. You'd press the enter, and you go, oh, that's not what I was thinking, okay? So you're anticipating, it's APL expressions, you press the enter. Once you anticipate what the answer is, you see what the actual result is. And you go through these sorts of exercises. And if you're honest with yourself, you're getting something out of that, as long as you're willing to think, all right, what's it going to do? But you can always just go wham, 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 wham. Oh, yeah, I knew that. You're not going to get a lot out of it. But you're not going to pass the third section, because the third section of each unit is the reading problems. They're word problems. They say, given that you have a vector of numbers called V, how would you compute the average of those numbers? Or given that you have a garden area that's 24 by 15, what's the perimeter of the garden? Write the APL expression to solve these problems. And you have to type in an APL expression to solve the problem. You could type an expression, press test, and it would show you, and you go, no, that's not right. Try it again, try it again, try it again, until you finally get it. And if you type invalid expressions, it gives you error messages and so on. And when you're finally ready, you think you're right, you say submit, it submits it, and it tells you whether you're right or you're not right, how you're wrong, if you're wrong. And if you do one of the common mistakes, it says you're doing this because you're probably thinking this, try this instead. So you've got these word problems. So the tutorial consists of these 36 units. Now, I think originally there were probably 18 or 19, and over the years we just kept adding until we finally got to the point that the brain was empty. Everything that I knew about APL was in this. There's probably a few units I could add now after it's been a number of years. So a year ago, I was at this conference. It was in Denmark. It was the Dyalog APL conference, and I was at a session talking about training APLers. And it occurred to me, my God, they need a tutorial. I mean, the tutorial, where have I been for these last 10 years or so? It shouldn't be delivered as a piece of software you need to install on your machine. It should be on the internet. If it's on the internet, you can walk up to the man on the street and you can say, you're curious about APL? Just go to this website. You want to learn APL? Just go to this website. There's nothing else you have to say. I don't have to give him a manual, don't have to give him a disk, don't have to give him anything. Just say, go to this website. Try it out, and it'll show you what it is. It'll explain it to you. If it doesn't explain everything you need to know, then it's not computer-based training. It's not written well. You should be able to go there and find out, A, if you like APL, and B, whether or not you can learn APL. So during the last year, we've been modifying the tutorial that we have that was written in APL Plus so that it works under the internet, HTML and all that kind of stuff, instead of being written in my native language, APL. It's written in this other goop. But it's running in APL. It's using APL, and it's using Dyalog APL, and it's teaching you Dyalog APL. It's not complete. The first 22 units are complete. And we'll complete more. It turns out that's not a problem. You might say, geez, I'm not even going to look at it because I don't care about 20. I want to see the whole thing. It turns out that when you actually plug somebody into this tutor, as we did here, they get up to, my experience, about units 12, 14, 15, and then it starts coming out their ears. You know, as fast as it's going in their eyes, it's shooting out their ears. There's just so much material that you have to use it for it to stay. So at that point, they generally back away from the tutorial, and they need a real-world problem. And so in this case, you could come up with anything that works for you. This was the problem that I presented her. Write a function named mortgage which returns the monthly payment amounts for a mortgage loan. So I'm taking out a mortgage on this home. It's going to be this, the interest rate is this, and the principal is this, and so on, and the term is this. How much will I have to pay per month? So I'm just wondering, you know, all right, it's going to be $175.12 each month. Write the function. There's the formula. I mean, I'm not even going to make you look it up. There's the formula. So, you know, any one of you could sit down and write a one-line function. It's right there. And do it. But if you've never written a function before, you have to know how to write a function. You have to know how to have the header just so, and seems simple, but it takes a little bit. Now, she gives me a solution. I look at it and I go, well, yeah, but I'll tell you what. We usually don't use variable names that are 17 characters long. So make them a little bit smaller. And I like to see the localized names alphabetized. That's Gary. See, this is what I'm saying. You know, you can shape her so that when she's done, I can't tell the difference between if I wrote this or if she wrote this. That may seem cruel, but, you know, I end up being much more appreciative and fond of an employee that works for me that writes code that looks like I wrote it. So this was perhaps the third or fourth iteration where I finally said, my goodness, I like that. All right, tell you what. It's time to beef it up a little bit, all right? So now you can write that. How about if we write me a function called mortsched, which is a schedule. So this one here, all right, I know I got to pay $127 a month, but I'd like to know how much of it is principal and how much of it is interest, and show it to me over the 3 years of the loan or whatever it is. And that very last payment may not be exactly the same as all the other payments because it's got to exactly even out that last little lingering amount that's in there. So this is going to actually involve a loop. It involves a loop. It involves matrices. It's going to be a little more complicated. Bring in some other concepts. Now, she takes this problem and she goes, oh, I don't know what to do. Goes back to the tutor. Back to the tutor. I say it's not just the tutor. We have more than the tutor here. You know, you have online help in the APL system. You have introductory APL. You can use anything you want. The tutor is just one of the things you can use. So she's researching, figuring out, comes back with a solution. I don't like it, send it back, tell her why. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until she gives me something that, okay, I got to have header comments. It's just me. There are going to be header comments in there, or I'm not going to accept it. There's end-of-line comments. You got a little bit of iteration going on there with some control structures. You might not like the indent. Only indented a couple. You might not like that. If you don't, you tell her. Don't indent it 2, indent it 6. Whatever turns you on. So this was finally good for me, and you beef it up, and you beef it up, and you beef it up. This one here, all right, now how about a little bit of a report? All right, now, I don't care if you're doing reporting through certain utilities and tools. She's got to know how to do this. She has, at least if she's going to work for me, she's got to know how to work with character arrays so you can glom them together and center things and do column headings, and quad FMT is going to be important. So all of these are in this thing. Go at it. She's asking me questions. Where do I find this? Go to this. Back and forth we go. And this is the routine that finally worked for me. There's a utility function in there that we had laying around. I said, use this for this piece. She wrote the center function, and so on, and that worked for me. Beef it up more. All right, now, I'm not going to show you the solution on this one here. All right, so now we have mort rip it. Take that report and perhaps send it to the screen or to the printer. Printing. Or build it as an RTF file. Well, that's too crazy. I'm not going to ask her to learn RTF, so she, you know. But there's a utility we have to use, this utility. So now I'm throwing utilities at her that we happen to use so that she's going to have to know how to use these utilities. So I'm throwing these at her, and she solves the problem. There's a solution. I won't show you. I was happy with it, so I beefed it up a little bit more. All right, now we're going to have you writing the thing out to Excel. There's another utility. Look at this, da, da, da. And the next thing you realize is, wait a minute. She's writing functions that are as complicated as anything I want her to be doing, for which I hired her. There's no point in this screwy stuff anymore. It's time to give her a real problem. And now we're going to go through. And now we've established the interaction. You know, here's the problem to be solved. Here are the specs. Here are some utilities you can use. Look over here, and away you go. The process took 3.5 months. The engineer, after 8 months, he said, you know, I don't think this is working. And I agreed. And well, we got one good programmer out of it. Mission accomplished. APLer built a spec. Any questions? Now, the tutorial, as Morton said, is it's in his hands. Okay, I can blame him that it's not there. There's just some little technical thing. I can blame him too. Whenever it is available, it's just a URL, and you go to it, and I won't tell you how to use it because if I have to tell you how to use it, then it's not very good. And I have failed. There's also, well, I don't say anything more than that. You should be able to go to it and figure it all out. And it really is designed for people who know nothing about APL and nothing about programming. I mean, it assumes they are starting. In other words, you could give it to your spouse. I mean, we've all done that. You know, APL is so easy. And you turn to your spouse, hey, try to, you try to. APL is not meant for everybody, you know. You've all found that out, right? You go, what's the matter? You can't figure that out? Well, you can go ahead and you can turn your spouse onto this, but it's still not going to work. Doesn't matter how good the tutorial is, your spouse is never going to learn it. Other questions? Yes.
Did you have programmers, any people with programming background that sort of got in the way of thinking in an APL way? They had to learn something in a certain more rigid way or more sequential way?
The question is whether or not I've run into people who, because of their experience in other programming languages, find it as an obstacle. I can't say in terms of the tutorial, because the nature of the tutorial is I give them the tutorial and I never hear from them again. Yeah. See, other than in this case where I'm interacting with her. She didn't have that problem. But certainly when I was teaching APL classes, that was not uncommon. You know, you'd have somebody who knew nothing about programming, somebody who did, and sometimes you had to fight with them to try to break them out of that mold. They're thinking that way, and sometimes you'd be arguing. I remember one guy saying, "That grade up, that's stupid. To sort something, you got to go through 2 steps." And I said, "Well, yeah, but," and I start to try to explain why it could be useful, because you know you could order other things as well. Nope, that makes no sense. You know, I don't think he's using APL today, where some of the other people probably are. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Does your tutorial contribute at all to this back and forth in getting her to come up with a style that fits your review?
Well, one thing you have to understand is I wrote the tutorial.
Why doesn't she get it right off the bat?
Well, that's the amazing thing. You know, you would think that she could look at I expected that after going through the tutorial, she would write functions just the way I wrote them. But it's amazing. And not only that, the engineer, he was doing the same thing. So he's sending me back, and his versus hers, a world apart. It's just amazing. It was the same thing in classes. You teach a class, and you give out certain problems, and they come back with solutions that A, are different, and B, you've never seen anything like it before. You know, it just reflects upon how they think. But to answer your question, no, the tutorial is not going to turn everybody into a Gary clone. So that's a good thing, right?
When you were teaching classes and you wanted to give them an exam, did they work off the screen or did they work off a written test with, you know?
I never gave an exam. You know, unless the course itself was considered an exam. Towards the latter years, the kind of course I was doing was I'd talk for you know, maybe an hour, explain a little bit about APL philosophy and how it worked and so on, and then I would say, all right, now here's a problem to solve, and I'd give it all to them, and they would work on solving that problem, and as they solved it, they'd come to me individually. So they'd still be working on it, this person would be solving the problem, and I'd go through with them, make comments on it, give them the next one. Some people, they were all sort of independently operating, so some would get through, you know, 23, 24, 25, some people get through 5 or 6, sort of at their own pace. So it wasn't a test. Never, you know, I was never teaching in an academic environment. I was teaching actuaries, business environment, where they're paying me to come in there. I can't say, you flunk, you know. I don't care if they flunk or not, as long as you pay me.
I think something that's missing from a lot of introductory programming books is approach to debugging. Is that something that you feel you should address specifically, or is that something that the student should have to figure out for themselves?
We have a unit on debugging. And does that answer your question? No, I don't think they should. I mean, they could. They could figure everything out on their own if you really want to torture them. But the units in the tutorial, they're all sort of philosophical. They start out trying to explain the motivation behind it. It's not about telling you, all right, we're going to run through all the primitives, and here are how the primitives work. It's more like, well, do we really need this primitive? And APL creator number one says, no, there's no point in that. And the other one says, yeah, so having little arguments back and forth as far as debugging. Well, how should we do this? Well, we can do that. No, that doesn't work. So, it's trying to explain. And these guys who are having these discussions, it's really me. It's really me explaining all of the confusions that I've run into in teaching people and confusions I've run into in learning things, just to help them understand a little more of the motivation behind it. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.